by the news of her death, and sincere condolences that he wants to send to Benazir Bhutto's family. He said that she showed a deep commitment to her country and that she knew the risks but believed her country needed her, which is why she returned after being in exile for 8 years. He said, though, that it was a time for restraint, and he called for unity in Pakistan. Of course, that will be the big question for everybody. What actually happens? What will the implications be? And David Miliband said that the extremist groups have in their sights all those committed to democracy processes in Pakistan. And that, of course, will be the big worry for politicians within Pakistan, but across the world. But here for the British government, that will be something that they will be looking at very closely, because, of course, Pakistan, such a strategically important country, its border with Afghanistan, links with President Musharraf. The West had built up those links in the hope that, of course, they would be a bulwark against extremism, against terrorist acts. He had been criticised, of course, for not doing enough, but the Americans, the Bush administration particularly, hoped that he would be an ally in that war against terror, as was labelled by the Americans. Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister here, is expected to give a statement, a personal statement, in the next hour or so. He had been in his constituency, but we also have had reaction from some of the other parties, particularly about the consequences of what has happened. Nick Clegg, the newly elected leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, has said it's a dark day for everyone who believed in a stable democratic future, and he called for the full restoration of democracy.
She had held talks with David Miliband and spent a great deal of time in this country, although I think she was exiled, spent most of her self-imposed exile in Dubai. How did they reconcile the fact that she would be a key political player with so many corruption charges hanging over her and her family?
Yes, well, of course, that was the problem. You know, she left Pakistan under a cloud because of those corruption charges. But I think after a period of time, and of course, she was claimed that there was never any proof in any of those charges. And once, of course, President Musharraf agreed an amnesty of those corruption allegations against her, that she was allowed back, there was this thought here, certainly amongst the British political establishment, that she would help pave the way to full democracy in Pakistan, particularly with those elections coming up next month. And as you said, David Miliband, the Foreign Secretary, had only just recently met Benazir Bhutto here in London in September. They had talked about the dangerous security situation there. Of course, that has in fact been a prescient warning to what happened to her once she returned in October. She, of course, her procession was fired on in Karachi, tens of thousands of supporters there to greet her when she returned, but then, of course, 2 bombs going off, underlining how dangerous it really was. But even then, David Miliband had called for more work, for more support to help democracy be restored fully in Pakistan. And then, of course, this has happened. We will hear, no doubt, from the Prime Minister about what he hopes will happen in terms of calling for unity ahead of those elections in January. But there will no doubt be great fear about the implications that could ripple out across that region, particularly when you think the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, where President Musharraf was criticised for allowing people to travel across into Afghanistan, where British troops were fighting and still are fighting the tough war against the Taliban. They will be worried about any more instability and any more talk about civil war and the effect that that might have in the region.
Joe Coburn, outside the Foreign Office in London. Thank you.
Well, we're getting messages in from Pakistan. Hindu Gaitan here from Rawalpindi says, I was in the rally to support her. There was a deafening loud blast. At first I just trembled, then everyone started running. Then there was chaos, says Hindu Gaitan. From Mohammed Rais in Islamabad, I'm very sad. All the people working in my office stopped working and just waited for news. Now her death is confirmed. The situation will become worse. And from Amina Jamal in Lahore, there are no words to describe the loss that people will face. The condition of Pakistan will become more critical. Well, our diplomatic editor, Brian Hanahan, is here in the studio. What about the implications of this, Brian?
Well, it's interesting what the international community is starting to say. I thought it was interesting what David Miliband has said when he made his remark there about they have in their sights all those committed to democratic processes in Pakistan. Very similar comment has come from the French Foreign Minister, who reaffirmed France's commitment to Pakistan's stability and its democracy, which must be at the centre of attention of the entire international community. And I would expect that we'll hear very similar comments from the United States when President Bush makes his statement. The difficulty here is whoever did this wanted to stop the elections. That's the one clear thing. Why they wanted to do it, all that will be taken through, but they wanted to stop these elections. Does President Musharraf have the will and the ability to go ahead with the elections, which effectively are seen as the way to produce stability in Pakistan? They're only 2 weeks away. He might decide to push on with them and try and get out of this knot that the country has tied itself in, or he might decide that the danger of a backlash against himself and possibly an uprising, almost an uprising by Benazir Bhutto supporters in the streets will make the whole thing too unstable and it can't be done. But what is the alternative? The problem normally would be you would turn to martial law, emergency rule, a period of strong, stable government from the centre to stabilise the country while you then went on to democracy. That's been tried in Pakistan. It hasn't really failed. The authority of the army and its willingness to do this is in doubt, and whether or not it would be possible to stabilise the country with a period of this kind of central rule by the president is something that I think he must weigh up very carefully. But he is the president, and he's a man who wants to has made it clear he wants to stay on as president, so there is a degree of self-interest in these calculations which he'll be making.
And even for anyone who thinks they don't know much about Pakistan, there are some very big issues in that country, aren't there, which will ring bells with anyone. There's a nuclear-armed state right next to another nuclear-armed state, right next to Afghanistan, and there's the big issue of Al-Qaeda.
It is that Al-Qaeda issue which is probably the most dangerous. The others have been there. They can be dealt with by the processes. I mean, they're rough, they're ready, and they're crude in Pakistan, but they have been dealt with. But the Al-Qaeda process, the idea of Islamic jihad, which is at the core of most of this current problem, is really what is destabilizing the country. And this is why I say the army is in doubt. The army is losing the will, it seems, sometimes, to go in and take on the people who are responsible for this. And behind this, you have to remember one central fact. There are people here who want to destroy Pakistan as a state. It's not that they're trying to gain some particular advantage for in the next hour or so is how can they try to do the least damage? How can they try to ensure the long-term stability of Pakistan, given that they have people who are trying to damage it?
Brian, thanks.
Well, in the last few minutes, we're hearing on the Agence France Presse news agency that the UN Security Council is to meet in emergency session later today to discuss the situation in Pakistan following the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. Let's just bring you the latest pictures we're having from Rawalpindi, showing the aftermath of that assassination attempt, or successful attempt on her. In fact, we'll come to those pictures in a moment. Let's speak to the British Labour peer, Baroness Udin, who joins us on the line now. What is your reaction to today's assassination, Baroness Udin?
Oh, good afternoon. I'm just really deeply saddened. I'm so sad that Pakistan has lost a very courageous leader. I saw her just a few days before she went to Pakistan, and she talked with so much hope, and I'm so devastated for her family. My condolences to her family, and obviously Pakistan is in a state of panic, I'm sure, at the loss of her contribution to the democratic process that surely must now come.
She was a woman of great charisma and charm. Did she know the risks she faced?
Actually, I asked her, I said to her that surely you know what a risk you're taking. And she said there is no alternative. But because she loved her country, she wanted to work through the process of seeking a democratic mandate, and she was willing to do everything she possibly could. And I'm just so sad that her family today, her daughter